Today, we're diving into a huge geopolitical question, and we're going to use a pretty dramatic hypothetical to get right to the heart of things.
So, just imagine for a second, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei is assassinated. That news would send absolute shockwaves around the world. But this isn't just about one person. It's about whether an entire system of government could survive its biggest possible test.
You'd have a country in mourning, for sure, but the real issue, a massive power vacuum at the very top. So that leads to some big questions. How is the Iranian state even set up to handle something like this? And really, is the system strong enough to survive a hit like that?
Okay, so to really get what's at stake here, we first need to understand just how big of a hole this kind of event would leave right in the center of the Iranian government.
See, the supreme leader isn't some distant figurehead. For decades, Ali Khamenei has been the final word on literally everything. The military, the courts, you name it. So him suddenly being gone, well, that's not just a political problem. It's a seismic shock to the whole foundation of the state.
So, what would happen next? Well, believe it or not, Iran's constitution actually has a plan for this exact scenario. Let's take a look at the official blueprint.
On paper, it's all laid out pretty clearly. First, a temporary three-person council takes over right away. It's made up of the president, the head of the judiciary, and one cleric. Then, this group called the Assembly of Experts, all 88 of them, gets together. Their one and only job? To pick the next supreme leader. Simple, right? Well, the official process is really only half the story.
To understand the real power dynamics, you have to know about the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, this is not just an army. It's arguably the most powerful institution in the entire country. They control security, intelligence, and a huge chunk of the economy, everything from oil to construction projects.
And this quote right here, it nails it. The Assembly of Experts might make the official decision, but let's be real. No one is becoming the next supreme leader without the IRGC's stamp of approval. They are the kingmakers. Their backing isn't just helpful, it's absolutely essential.
So this all leads us to the core of the debate. When faced with this ultimate test, is the Iranian state basically unbreakable? Or is it more like a house of cards, just waiting for a big enough push?
Now, what's really interesting here is how you can see these two completely opposite views laid out side by side. On one side, you've got the argument for resilience. You have that powerful security state, the IRGC. You've got decades of institutional history, and a pretty weak and divided opposition. But then on the other side, you've got the case for fragility, an ideology many say is bankrupt, a major crisis of legitimacy with the people, a terrible economy, and a history of huge protests.
The people who argue for resilience, they point to this number, 47 years. The Islamic Republic has been around for almost half a century. It's survived wars, sanctions, massive unrest. You just can't ignore that kind of track record.
And that staying power comes from a few key places. For one, the system was built on top of an already existing government bureaucracy. It has incredibly powerful security forces that are deeply loyal, and hey, it's actually proven before that it can replace top leaders who've been assassinated without missing a beat. And maybe most important, even during the biggest protests, you just haven't seen major players from inside the regime jump ship.
And then there's this weird psychological element. An attack from the outside can create this rally around the flag effect. It can actually make people, even some in the opposition, unify with the state against a common enemy. So weirdly enough, an external threat can sometimes make them stronger internally.
But that's only one side of the coin. Now let's flip it and look at the other argument, which paints a very, very different picture. One that's all about the deep cracks between the government and the people it governs.
Yeah, the counter-argument is that the regime's original ideology just doesn't connect with people anymore. For a huge part of Iran's population, especially the youth, there's this massive disconnect, a really deep crisis of legitimacy between the rulers and the ruled.
And this crisis isn't just theoretical, it's fueled by very real problems. People are fed up with economic corruption and just bad management. They're angry about the lack of social and political freedoms. And of course, there's the memory of past protests being crushed, which just makes that anger run deeper.
And you can literally see this crisis in the numbers. Just look at how voter turnout has been steadily dropping. When fewer and fewer people think it's even worth it to participate in the system, that's a huge red flag that they're rejecting the system itself.
So, you've got these two powerful, competing forces, resilience on one side and fragility on the other, both pulling on the state. So what happens next? What does the future actually hold?
Well, it seems like the major external players, they get how complicated this is. The stated goal might be regime change, but the strategy isn't banking on some quick overnight collapse. It's all about playing the long game.
At its core, the strategy is basically a war of attrition. The idea is to use things like sanctions to really hurt the economy, which then fuels more public anger and more protests. The hope is that if you keep that pressure on long enough, the regime will eventually start to crack from the inside.
And that right there leaves us with the ultimate question. Does all of this immense pressure, both from the outside and the inside, act like a hammer that's going to shatter a brittle system? Or does it act more like a forge, burning away the weaknesses and hardening the regime into something even tougher and more defiant than before? That is the test Iran faces.